Ask any Vietnam veteran about the M60, and you'll get either a grin or a curse. Some will tell you it saved their life more times than they can count. Others will just shake their heads, mutter a few words not fit for TV, and walk away. They called it the pig, not because of how it looked, but because of how it behaved. It was loud, messy, and always hungry for more. Every pull of the trigger meant feeding it another belt of ammo, and like a real pig, it never seemed satisfied. But the pig wasn't born in the jungle. It came from boardrooms and weapons labs, where engineers thought they'd built the perfect machine gun for America's next war. They dreamed of one gun that could do it all, light enough for a foot patrol, heavy enough for a bunker. A weapon that would make soldiers feel unstoppable. On paper, it looked brilliant. In the mud of Vietnam, it looked like trouble wrapped in steel. To the men who carried it, the M60 was more than a weapon. It was a relationship. And like most bad relationships, it started out great. In training, it roared like thunder and hit like a hammer. Every recruit wanted to be the gunner. But after the first few patrols in the jungle heat, that romance turned into regret. 23 pounds of metal, plus belts of ammo, water, rations, and the constant whisper in the back of your head. If we get ambushed, I'm the first target. Still, when the shooting started, everyone prayed the pig would keep firing. When it worked, it was beautiful, unstoppable. When it didn't, well, let's just say a jammed M60 could make a grown man invent new swear words. It was both hero and villain, savior and curse. So why did the U.S. Army, after putting so much faith in it, decide to walk away from its favorite machine gun? Was it the weight, the jams, or something darker, something buried in the mud and memories of Vietnam itself? To answer that, we have to go back, before the ambushes, before the sweat and blood, to the moment America tried to build its own perfect killing machine, and ended up the pig. After World War II, the U.S. Army found itself swimming in a sea of guns, and none of them could agree on what they wanted to be. You had the Thompson spraying .45s, the M1 Garand booming with .42, 30-06, the Bar lumbering along somewhere in between, and the old Browning water-cooled monsters still chugging away like steam engines. Every squad looked like a gun show that got lost in a jungle. Ammunition logistics? A nightmare. Try supplying 5 kinds of bullets to one platoon and see how long before someone snaps. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Americans had seen what the Germans pulled off with their MG-42. Sleek, fast, deadly, and simple. If death ever had a soundtrack, it would have been that ripping sound at 1,200 rounds per minute. The MG-42 didn't care whether it was on a tripod, a tank, or hanging out of a window. It just worked. It was so good, in fact, that U.S. engineers couldn't stop drooling over it. They wanted one just like it, only with a friendly Made in America stamp. So they borrowed a little from the MG-42 Sol, added some ideas from the FG-42 paratrooper rifle, because why not, and sprinkled on American optimism, the same kind that said, we can fix anything with chrome and chewing gum. The plan was simple. One gun for every role. A general-purpose machine gun that could replace everything from the Bar to the M1919, light enough for infantry, strong enough for vehicles. But first, NATO had to get its act together. The alliance decided everyone should at least agree on the same bullet, the 7.62 by 51 millimeter round. Because if you can't share a language, at least you can share ammo. So the M60 was born into a world dreaming of standardization and Cold War unity, where every soldier in Europe might someday be shooting the same cartridge at the same enemy. By 1956, the Army had what it thought was a masterpiece, belt-fed, gas-operated, quick-change barrel, and ready to rain democracy on any target in range. On the range, it was glorious. On paper, it was perfect. But as history loves to remind us, paper doesn't sweat, bleed, or jam. The Americans wanted their own MG-42, and what they got was a machine gun with the heart of a German beast and the mood swings of a broken lawnmower. By 1965, the jungles of Vietnam were ready to test everything America thought it knew about war, and the M60 was about to earn its scars. Gone were the heavy Brownings that needed tripods and 3 men to move. In came the pig, slung over the shoulder of a 20-year-old kid who thought he was Rambo before Rambo even existed. The first time they fired it in combat, the ground itself seemed to jump. The bark peeled off trees, leaves rained down, and even the birds got the message. This was not the place to be. For a while, the troops loved it. The pig had bite. It spat out 7.62 rounds that tore through bamboo, brush, and whatever unlucky soul happened to be behind them. In the early firefights, squads that carried an M60 suddenly felt like small gods of thunder. It was heavy, sure, but when it roared, the enemy ducked. "Keep feeding it," became the rallying cry. Each metallic belt rattled like a heartbeat. The M60 wasn't just a gun. It was the sound of power, the rhythm of survival. But the jungle had a cruel sense of humor. That same roar made you the loudest thing within a mile. And when the Viet Cong listened, they listened well. They knew who to aim for. The M60 gunner became target number 1. The moment he opened fire, every enemy muzzle turned his way. In theory, the machine gun was the backbone of the squad. In practice, it was a glowing bullseye with legs. There's an old saying that an M60 gunner had 7 seconds to live after pulling the trigger. Maybe that's an exaggeration, maybe, but it tells you how it felt. The moment the pig screamed, time slowed down. You could almost feel the incoming rounds slicing the air around you, thudding into the dirt, cracking branches. Still, you didn't stop, because when the squad got ambushed, it was your fire that kept everyone alive. You were the anchor, the noise, the reason anyone made it out. Ask those who carried it, and they'll tell you the M60 was both guardian angel and curse. When it worked, it was flawless, pure mechanical poetry. But when it jammed, when mud or rust crept in, it was like being betrayed by your best friend in the middle of a gunfight. Some soldiers joked that the pig had moods. Sometimes it sang. Sometimes it sulked. After a long firefight, the gunner would sit in the mud, barrel smoking, hands shaking from the recoil, ears ringing so hard he couldn't hear the world anymore. Maybe he'd laugh. Maybe he'd curse. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was still alive because that stubborn chunk of steel had chosen to behave today. And tomorrow? Who knew? In the Vietnam jungle, there were no second chances. You carried the pig. You fed it. You prayed to it. Because in those 7 seconds between life and death, the only thing standing between you and a body bag was whether your machine gun decided to be your friend or your funeral. Every M60 crew in Vietnam was like a small, sweaty family, bound by noise, smoke, and too much weight. The gunner carried the pig itself, 23 pounds of metal and misery. His assistant lugged spare barrels and fed the belts through, while the third guy, affectionately called the mule, carried ammo boxes stacked like bricks of gold. Together, they were the heartbeat of the squad. Loud, filthy, and permanently exhausted. Marching through the jungle felt like a punishment handed down by the gods. Every step sunk into mud that tried to steal your boots. The humidity made the air thick enough to chew. And if you weren't swearing about leeches, you were swearing about the weight. A 100-round belt of 7.62 weighed 7 pounds, and everyone carried at least one. Multiply that by 10 belts and a rifle of your own, and suddenly light infantry became the joke of the century. Then there was the ammo problem. The jungle didn't care about your logistics. Rain turned everything into soup. Belts rusted, links bent, rounds jammed. Guys started getting creative, wrapping belts in plastic, coiling them into claymore bags, or shoving them in socks just to keep the bugs off. Some gunners even taped C-ration tins under the feed tray to guide the belts in smoother. Others went full mad scientist. They took helicopter ammo chutes, rigged them to old radio packs, and made homemade backpack feeders. It looked ridiculous, but when you could fire 400 rounds without reloading, nobody laughed. Well, almost nobody. The brass didn't exactly approve of turning military gear into Frankenstein's monster, but out in the bush, rules were optional and survival was mandatory. The long-range recon patrols took it even further. They sawed off the barrel and stock to make it lighter. It kicked like a mule, lit up like a flamethrower, and sounded like thunder trapped in a can. They'd call it the short pig. Ugly but effective. There's a story about one recon team ambushed deep in enemy territory. The gunner stood up, spinning in circles while firing that chopped-down M60 in every direction. The muzzle flash lit the trees like lightning, and the noise convinced the enemy they were facing a whole platoon. It bought them just enough confusion to escape. When they finally caught their breath, someone muttered, "Guess Frankenstein still works." In Vietnam, ingenuity wasn't a choice. It was survival. Out there, duct tape, spare wire, and pure desperation turned the pig from a flawed machine into something that, for a few lucky men, could bend fate just long enough to see another sunrise. The love affair with the pig didn't last long. Vietnam's jungle had a way of chewing up good intentions and spitting out broken steel. The humidity corroded everything. The mud found its way into every crevice, and soon enough, the mighty M60 started showing its dark side. Soldiers began to whisper that their gun had moods. One day it purred like a loyal dog. The next, it tried to kill you. It started small. A jam here, a failure to feed there, nothing a good kick or some colorful language couldn't fix. But then came the runaway guns, the nightmare of every M60 crew. You'd pull the trigger, fire a burst, and then release, only it didn't stop. The pig just kept firing on its own, roaring uncontrollably until it burned through the belt or someone tackled it to the ground to twist the feed and break the link. Imagine being under fire while your own weapon decides it no longer takes orders. Some called it terrifying. Others called it Tuesday. And that was just the start. The M60 loved to rip the rims off spent cartridges, leaving empty shells jammed deep inside the chamber. You couldn't fix that in a hurry. You had to poke it out with a cleaning rod or, if you were unlucky, a knife. The gunner would mutter through his teeth, "Hold on, fellas, she's thinking about it," while the rest of the squad prayed the enemy wasn't. Then there was the barrel. Theoretically, it had a quick change system. In reality, it was about as quick as changing a tire in the middle of a firefight. The manual said you should swap barrels every 10 minutes of sustained fire. Sure, if you enjoyed handling red-hot metal that glowed like hell's flashlight. The gunners learned to wrap rags or use wire hangers as makeshift handles. Many still came away with second-degree burns, but hey, at least the gun was technically operational. Sometimes the jungle itself joined the fight against you. A vine would snag the barrel latch, and suddenly your weapon was in 2 pieces before you even noticed. One second you're ready to fire, the next you're holding a barrel in your hand like a bad magic trick. "Ta-da!" someone would mutter, right before the shooting started again. The pistol grip cracked, the trigger wore down, and the gas system clogged faster than a soldier's lungs after 3 days in the bush. Every malfunction had the same cruel timing. It always happened when you needed the gun most. The pig had no sympathy. It demanded care, cleaning, and constant prayer. Still, the gunners kept faith. They taped it, wired it, oiled it, cursed it, and went back to firing. Because when it behaved, it was a monster in their favor. But every man who carried it knew the truth. The pig was unpredictable. It saved lives one minute and nearly ended them the next. "She saved me once," one veteran said years later, staring into the distance. "Then she almost killed me twice." By the end of the war, most men had learned to respect the pig the way you respect a wild animal. You don't trust it, you just hope it bites the other guy first. By the late 1970s, the Army finally decided it had loved the pig long enough. The romance was over, and reality had kicked down the door. The M60 had fought hard, screamed louder than any other gun in the jungle, and left behind a trail of both glory and profanity. But time, as always, demanded something new, something less temperamental, less hungry for attention. Enter the Belgian FN Mag, reborn in American hands as the M240. Heavier, yes. Prettier? Not really, but it was solid, dependable, and didn't throw tantrums when you asked it to do its job. For the soldiers who had carried the pig, it was bittersweet. They'd learned to live with its flaws, patch them, tape them, curse them into submission. It was like losing an old dog that used to bite you, but still guarded the house. The M240 was more refined, more predictable. It didn't jam when it rained or melt when it fired too long. It didn't need prayers, just maintenance. To some, that reliability was comforting. To others, it felt almost boring. The pig, for all its sins, had personality. But the pig didn't really die. It just moved to new homes. You could still hear its bark from helicopter doors, on patrol boats slicing through brown rivers, and from the hands of special operations teams who knew exactly what it could still do. It might have been outdated, but when that bolt slammed forward and the barrel thundered, nobody dared call it obsolete. And then came Hollywood. Rambo hoisted it shirtless and turned it into legend. The movies made it immortal, the gun that spat freedom one belt at a time. Veterans in dark theaters chuckled quietly, whispering, "Yeah, sure, he makes it look light." The pig had gone from jungle nightmare to pop culture icon, from sweat and blood to silver screen glory. Today, the M60 sits in museums, in veterans' collections, and sometimes still in service across the world. Older, but not forgotten. For those who carried it, the sound of its roar still lives somewhere deep in memory, a mix of fear, pride, and survival. They remember the weight, the heat, the smell of gun oil and jungle rain. And maybe, if you ask the right man on the right day, he'll tell you, weapons fade, armies move on, but the men who carried the pig never really left it behind.